There's been an explosion of all these, Gracie Jiu-Jitsu and things like that. When I was training, I was told there's no such thing as a superior martial art, just superior martial artists. How do you feel about that?
I think that's probably a fairly accurate statement. The art is only as good as the person practicing it. And I do think that there are some arts that lend themselves well or better, let's say, to a certain body type. For example, Taekwondo is real athletic. And so if you're a person that's built like that, and let's say a person that might do well at gymnastics or something like that, they probably would do well at Taekwondo. On the other hand, if you're 40 pounds overweight and short and squatty, that may not be the art for you. So I think potential students are becoming more sophisticated in that they know enough to go around, look at different schools, and see what fits for them. What fits for their personality and what they're trying to get out of the training. All martial arts are beneficial from health standpoint, from self-defense standpoint, and so on. I do the ones that I do because that's what I like, and that's what I prefer to practice. But we always are looking at, and several times we'll bring people in every 3 or 4 months, instructors from other arts, to teach seminars for the weekend. And the idea is to complement our base.
Give you a different look.
Right, to give you a different perspective.
As someone who studied martial arts, I always enjoy talking to others about their experience and training. Could you share some of your accomplishments in your martial arts career?
Sure. I started training as a young boy back on the East Coast, and I was a little skinny kid that always got picked on, type of thing. And I really got into martial arts as a matter of self-preservation. And then I went into the Air Force and had the good fortune to wind up in Japan. As it turned out, I was already a black belt. I had about 7 or 8 years of training before I got to Japan as a teenager, and then in my early years in the service, I was in the Air Force. And I got to Japan, I spent 3 years there, and I trained with 2 very good instructors, one by the name of Shogo Kuniba, and another one by the name of Tero Hayashi. Unfortunately, Kuniba Sensei died here a few years ago. Hayashi Sensei is still alive and kicking quite strongly. So I trained, I stayed and lived in Japan for 3 years. And I went back and forth. After that, I came back to the United States, spent a couple of years up in North Dakota in the cold country, and came down here to Arizona. And I've been here in Arizona since 1973. So I've been teaching in Arizona since 1973. But then I got into a situation where I would go back and forth to Japan. I would either bring Mr. Hayashi over here, or I would go over there, and sometimes I did both in the course of 1 year. So I continued my education. I also trained with some other instructors, Yuichi Negishi. These were all out of the Shito-Ryu karate field. And these gentlemen, my teachers, were actually direct students of the originator, Kenwa Mabuni, whose picture is up there. He's the originator of the style. Later on, I had an opportunity to train with his second son, Kenzo Mabuni, so the son of the originator of the style. So I was very fortunate in having information coming to me from 4 well-known instructors in that style of karate. I also studied Okinawan weapons, starting in Japan in sword, and carried that through, and have studied with several different instructors over the years. So I'm one of these guys that's kind of multi-arts faceted, and I presently hold a 9th degree black belt in karate, a 9th degree black belt in Okinawan weapons. I have a Hanshi teaching license, which is the highest one that you can get in karate. I have a Kyoshi license in Okinawan weapons, and Shihan licenses, which is like master teacher licenses from Tero Hayashi and Kenzo Mabuni, and several other lesser awards as well. I hold a Kyoshi teaching license in Japanese sword from Toshishiro Obata. And so I've had some very good teachers, and that gives me an opportunity to give that information. I'm a traditional martial arts teacher, so I don't do American karate, and I don't homogenize the technique. In other words, I always identify it and say, well, this came from Tero Hayashi Sensei, this came from whoever. I always identify where that information came from, and we don't like put it all in a big pot and make a stew out of it. We keep the identity, in other words. My Okinawan Kobudo, for example, comes from several different styles of Kobudo. There are different styles or family groups. And again, we do Kenshin-ryu Kobudo, Matayoshi, Yamani. Those are names that may not mean anything to people that don't study that. But the point is that I don't take a Kenshin-ryu form and do it Yamani style. In other words, in terms of body language and the tradition, we keep the tradition within those styles. So we do an eclectic, if you will, Kobudo to preserve and protect that information. There's a real practical application to this, because a lot of people say, well, why do you study that today? It doesn't apply. And I always say, well, I beg to differ with you because, of course, empty hand techniques, whether it's wrist locks or pressure points or punching or kicking, that is hand to hand. This is not a studio. A studio is where you study dance. Okay. This is a martial arts dojo. Dojo means the place you study the way. Do is the way. So judo, aikido, karate do, kendo. Do means the way of some skill. So the dojo is like the building where I practice the do. Okay, so this is where I'm studying real martial arts, And so that's just my thing is when someone, like some guy called me the other day and said, hey, I went by your studio. And I'm like, oh,
Well, today,
I mean, that's
I've forgotten more than
so my students, if you ever get, and if same thing when I go do a seminar, if there's ever a complaint, it's like there's too much information. Like my brain is saturated, I can't take anymore, rather than, oh God, we're just doing reverse punch front kick, So, and because we're multifaceted, there's a lot of it. Shito-Ryu is a very broad syllabus of karate because the originator studied with there's two main schools in Okinawan karate, Nahate and Shurite. Shurite is what became known as Shorin-ryu. From Shorin-ryu you got Shotokan. From Shotokan you got Wado-ryu, like that. So that line, straight line, snappy movement, power emphasis, that kind of thing.
one technique.
Nahate, from the city of Naha, had a lot of Chinese influence, a lot of circular movements, hand movements, breathing, isometric training, and so on. So that became what became known then as Goju-ryu. Okay, and from there you had Okinawan Goju-ryu, which went to Japan, became Japanese Goju-ryu, and then you had some offshoots from that and so on. But Shito-Ryu is of the four major Japanese styles, being Shotokan, Wado-ryu, Goju-ryu, and Shito-Ryu. Shito-Ryu is the only one that takes information from both syllabuses, from Nahate and Shurite. So we do all of the Nahate / Goju-ryu kata, Seipai, Seienshin, Sanshin, Tensho, Saifa, all of those forms. We do all of the Shurite kata, Shorin-ryu / Shotokan, Basai Dai, Jion, Pinans or Heians, okay, Jute, Jin, Jion, so we're doing information from this syllabus and information from this syllabus. And then Mabuni Sensei, the originator of Shito-Ryu, studied with a Chinese tea merchant by the name of Go Kenki. And from him he got all this southern white crane kung fu stuff. So we do Hakusuru and which is very soft, stuff here, type of movement. Yeah, you do a movement with like blocking technique. This idea, and this is like a wrist block and a palm block, a soft movement. But so you have this blending, and of course the syllabus that keeps doing this. So you have straight line, Shurite, Shorin-ryu stuff, you have Goju-ryu stuff, you have Southern White Crane Kung Fu stuff, and then you have Mabuni, who created some of his own things, and eventually from studying with that. He also studied with a guy by the name of Uechi, who later founded the style called Uechi-ryu, which is an Okinawan style. That came out of an old Chinese thing called Pai Gai Nan Ryu, or something like a real strange thing. And he was an Okinawan who went to China, studied this very obscure style of Kung Fu, essentially, came back with so much information, added some of his own stuff, and created this Uechi-ryu, which is very different than any other Okinawan karate style. So Mabuni heard about this guy. He was in Kyushu. He was teaching in Kyushu, southern Japan, and Mabuni went with a fellow by the name of Konishi and went down and visited and hung out with the guy for a month or two to see what he was learning. Took that information, brought it back. In fact, we do a kata that he created after that trip called Shimpa, which is, when you look at it, it's definitely Chinese, influence. So Shito-Ryu is a broad-based syllabus style, and does a lot of grappling ideas and so on. Then we complement that with, all right, well, what happens if we're going to do weapons, and so we use the bow staff and the sai and the tonfa, and there's actually as many as 20 different weapons that they get into. The more common ones are the bow, sai, tonfa, nunchuck, kama, things like that. We do things like teko, which are the metal. In fact, I've got some I can show you there. They look like brass knuckles.
Yes.
And spear, nunti bow, 2 short sticks called nitan bow, which came out of using 2 pieces of firewood, and the eku, which is an oar, a boat oar.
That's my understanding was that most martial arts weapons, especially like the Japanese version, came from farm tools to defend against samurai swords.
In some degree, although the kabuto, the people that created, promoted, studied, and so on, that did kabuto were not peasants. They were really gentry. They were like samurai class, upper level people that got this information from China or several different sources and brought it back to Okinawa. The catalyst may have been that, the Satsuma clan came into Okinawa and said, okay, we're in control in 1609. Take away the weapons, because we don't want any uprising. So now it's like, well, I got to learn to use my hands or learn to use something that's handy, because I don't have a sword. They took my sword away. I have the knowledge of how to use a sword. Okay? So now I pick up a bow, which was used for shepherding or carrying bundles or whatever, and I use it, or I can pick up a stick and use it as a sword, whatever. So I can pick up these tools or whatever and apply them at the same angles of attack that I would a sword and so on. Sword is the older weapon, But so you had a guy that had martial arts training, in other words. It's like the old gunslinger, you take away his guns, it's like, he has the knowledge of how to use something, but he doesn't have the tool, so it's like, how do I replace that?
Weapon of opportunity.
Yeah, exactly. And so in Okinawa, in fact, there's what's called a tanto tembe, and it's like a little shield and a knife. Okay. And the story goes is that this concept of the shield, at one time could have even been a pot cover. It's like pick up the pot cover and protect yourself, because it's not a big shield, it's small. And then a knife or a machete or a short tanto, they call tanto a short knife. Okay. So you had that, like you say, weapon of opportunity. Nitanbo, 2 short sticks. It's like, well, let me pick up 2 pieces of firewood and use that. And so the one thing about Okinawa weapons is it gives you dexterity. It like beyond your hands and feet. Can I control this weapon? Each weapon has a different benefit, a different range. Okay, so if it's a long bow, for example, that has range, but in a small room, a bow is no good because it's too long. So now you want something shorter. Nunchucks, for example, if you look at nunchuck, sai, tonfa, bow, you look at those weapons and you look at the angles that they use to strike with, it's all sword angles. I mean, so you study sword and you study, okay, strike it this way, I can strike this way, I can strike this way, I can strike down, I can poke, and so on. Take those ideas. Now you don't have a sword. Take a nunchuck, strike down, strike side, strike up, It's just a different weapon applying the same angles. So one of the things you see is you'll see somebody studying with one weapon, and it's once they get the idea, they can carry that over to another weapon. And if they're studying karate along at the same time, the stance structure, the concept of basic blocks, you know, basic blocks. So you do. So now I'm doing a block here, empty-handed. Well, now the guy's got a stick or a sword or something. I put a tonfa in my hand and I can do the same block, same action, the same physical action as a karate block, only now I have a sai or a tonfa or something there, something to protect myself so the sword doesn't cut my arm off. Okay? So in Okinawa, pretty much anybody does karate does kobudo. I mean, that's part of it was just part of the same thing. They never really separated it. When it got over to Japan, the karate transferred over, and the kobudo, you know, was a separate thing. And so some schools do kobudo and some don't. Of course, when it came to the United States, same thing. So kobudo really didn't get a lot of exposure in the United States until late 60s, early 70s, when people like Fumio Demora came over. And in fact, I went to a tournament in 1967 in Las Vegas. It's the first time I met Chuck Norris, but also the first time I met Fumio Demora, and he did a demonstration of sai. So that's the first time I ever saw it. And I had been training since '60, so 7 years. I'd never seen any weapons, you know. But so he was one of the forerunners in the United States. Fumio Demora was for teaching kobudo. And then talking about,
I was searching for information about Rudy Crosswell on the internet, and
Yeah.
I came across things such as your magazine and your associations that you're involved with and
Yeah.
things of that nature.
yeah, in fact, we just launched our website, www.ArizonaBudokan. It's actually AZBUDOKAN, ArizonaBudokan.com. And on there, we have a lot of information that talks about kobudo, Shito Ryu karate, Shinkendo sword, and so on. The magazine, Dojo Magazine, I started that back in 1992, and it went on for several years and then got bought out by Black Belt Magazine. and actually now is run by Tiger Claw, and they changed it. But I became the editor-in-chief of that and wrote several articles over the course of several years in there about Shito Ryu karate and kobudo and so on. And in fact, you see that one there in the middle, that's Toshishiro Obata, that's my sword teacher. He's a well-known, in fact, he's made several movies. If you go back and look at the old Ninja Turtle movies, and he's done several things with Stallone and like that. He's always a heavy. He always plays the heavy, you know, because he's got that face. And in the Ninja Turtle movies, he was in charge of the bad ninja guys, you know, not the turtle like the other guys. But he's an Aikijutsu sensei and a sword teacher, and is actually the originator of Shinkendo sword, that particular method of sword. Very good martial artist, and he's based in Hollywood, California.